This is Center Stage, putting lawyers in the spotlight by highlighting attorneys and other industry experts to help take your law firm to the next level. Hey everyone, and welcome to Center Stage. I am your host, John Henson, and this week I am joined by another prominent podcaster in the legal world with Attorney Neil Tyra. We're going to be talking about how to be a more productive solo. Neil, thank you for joining us. How are you doing today?
I'm delighted to be here with you, John. It's a real pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, awesome. So I know that our CEO at Spotlight Branding, Mark, has been on your show a couple of times. I'm really glad you were able to come hang out with us for a little bit. So yeah, before we jump in, kind of take a second, introduce yourself. What should people know about you?
Great. Well, my name, as you heard, is Neil Tyra, and I'm an estate planning attorney outside of Washington, D.C. I'm one of those people that can't decide what he wants to be when he grows up because law is my fourth career. I tell people, I started off cooking for a living, then I built hardware and software systems for the government, principally NASA and DoD for many, many years. Then I owned and operated a martial arts studio. And finally, I sold that martial arts studio to go to law school late in life. I was the oldest student in my graduating law class by a long shot. And it was something that I really had always had an idea that I wanted to do. And shortly after being admitted to the bar, I also knew that I wanted to start a solo or small firm practice, as I'd already owned my own business before. And so I figured I'd made all the mistakes that one could make in trying to run a business and learning how to run a business. Little did I know that the law presents all kinds of new opportunities to make mistakes, which I have now completely taken advantage of and made every possible bad choice you could make in trying to run a law practice. And so I'm now at that point where I decided a few years ago that I was a podcast junkie and I wanted to start my own podcast. And I figured that if I interviewed some smart attorneys for 3 to 6 months, that some of that might rub off on me and I might become more educated as a result. And so I started the Law Entrepreneur, um, trying to answer the question what they didn't teach us about running a business in law school. Little did I know that there was such an audience for that kind of topic. That was a little over 5 years ago, and 270 some odd episodes ago. We're still going strong with a weekly podcast, and so now I really don't know. Am I ever if I'm going to retire from the practice of law first, or if I'm going to be one of those guys that just holds on like Larry King and does a podcast until the show is over.
Right. Yeah. It's, I've known you for a few years now, and it's really cool to just see how that show has really taken off. Um, so yeah, I mean, let's jump right into it. I know one thing about you is that you are just an unashamed Apple junkie. You
Yep.
are one of those people. I know, like Mark, who hosts a couple episodes of this show too. He is all about Apple. Mark, I think, was an Apple genius for a while before he opened his own business. And so, what are some easy hacks that you can share that can make an attorney more productive, assuming they are Apple users?
Well, yeah, I'm, as I said, an unashamed Apple fanboy and have been so since the very first Apple Macintosh computer. I remember I saw this ad in Time magazine for this box that had the word hello written in script. It was one of the first print ads that Apple did. And that was in the days when we had just the beginnings of a MS-DOS command line interface with personal computers. And I knew I needed this strange product that wrote the word hello on the screen. So I bought a 128K Mac, sight unseen, just bought it from the ad and have never looked back. I wish I had that 128K box these days because they're worth quite a lot of money,
Yeah.
particularly since I bought it literally the first week it came out. So not too bright in that regard. And I've virtually owned pretty much every Apple product you can own since then. I think if I'd invested as much money in my law practice as I have in Apple products, I'd probably be a lot further along in that regard. In terms of what can you do, and I think one of the strong selling points about Apple products, and it's to its detractors, is one of the things that people complain about, is that it's a closed system, and
Yeah.
that means that while third parties can develop for Apple platforms, you can't get access to to essentially the root level machine instructions that as you can in some other platforms. And so therefore the stability of the product is greatly enhanced. We hear a lot about people who own Macs have far less problems, or own Apple products have far less problems um, with viruses and malware and,
Yeah.
and things of that nature. So, you know, as an attorney, where you have to be really aware of client confidentiality and the privacy of information that you have, I don't know that you can stress that enough. Now, um, by the same token, the products out there that work with the Apple suite of products are so good in terms of protection that I don't think you really have to stress too much about privacy. I find it's interesting. A lot of attorneys kind of overwhelm themselves with concerns about privacy and about whether or not they want to store data in the cloud, as an example,
Yeah.
client data in the cloud, and yet they're the same ones that leave their laptop unattended at Starbucks when they have to run to the bathroom.
Right.
So I think if you for me, I have peace of mind using the Apple Suite because I know that things are going to work properly together. They're going to respect the privacy of the data, and yet at the same time, they're not going to be overly complicated and over engineer the problem. So I think that's the primary thing from an attorney standpoint. But I will say though, we are at the point now, and have been for a few years, where services, software as a service, is so prevalent, and so many things are done in the cloud that I pretty much think you can be platform agnostic. It doesn't really matter whether you use an Apple product or a Windows-based product, whether you use a iPhone or an Android phone, or pretty much it from from a user standpoint, or somebody interfacing with you, they can't tell what
Right.
platform you're on. You can't tell that I'm on a MacBook Air, and I can't tell that you're on whatever you're on. So
Right.
I think we're pretty much at that point where we're platform agnostic. So the war between Microsoft and Apple, I think, is kind of quieted down a little bit. Although I do have a real problem with that commercial right now that's running during the NCAA tournament, with a guy comparing the Microsoft Surface to a
Yeah.
Apple MacBook Air. Like, I keep screaming at the TV, those are not apples to apples comparisons, but
Yeah.
that's just me.
Totally agree. Yeah. I mean, I think the key selling point on that is that it's better for gaming. And I mean, I don't think Apple's ever really talked about itself as being a gaming platform.
Nah,
Yeah,
nope.
it's all about creator for more for creators and just everyday use and stuff like that. So beyond just kind of the type of computer that you're on, what are some different apps that you've found along the way that have helped you increase your productivity and kind of be more efficient in your law practice?
Well, I'm constantly kind of reevaluating that. That's how I frame it. Some people refer to it as suffering from shiny object syndrome. So I'm always looking at what can I use to uh, to enhance my productivity, because as a true solo, uh, really my ability to stay afloat is dependent on um, being able to efficiently do things. So I can't spend a whole lot of time trying to figure out how to do something. Um, and I think, one of the challenges that attorneys have in particular is we don't seem to very often um, go deep within an application. We frequently remain at the surface level and only use an application for 10, 15, 20% of its capability. So if I had
Mhm.
one piece of advice is, um, figure out which application you're using the most,
Mhm.
and learn every possible thing you can learn about that application's capabilities, and think about how you might be able to apply that to your own work. I mean, I remember when I was in law school, and this is still true today, that folks were using Microsoft Word as a word processing platform, and they had no idea of how, not to mention how you can format a document using styles,
Yeah.
but they had no idea how you could create a table of contents for a large document automatically using styles.
Yeah.
And when I would show them how to do that, it was like I was a wizard. I was saving them, hours upon hours of time, or a list of attributes when you had to list all the case quotes in an appellate brief. Um, People were doing that by hand, which is fraught with the opportunity for error. You
Yeah.
can let the computer do that for you automatically. And so that's not even down in the depths of understanding how Microsoft Word works, or Apple Pages works as a word processing platform. That's just kind of taking advantage of the application's capabilities. So that's really an important factor, I think, is to go deeper in the applications you have. So take a look at what you're using. What do you use most often? I think probably for attorneys, it is their word processor. That's the first thing. So I I use, as I said, Apple Pages. I've never found that not using the Microsoft suite of products was any hindrance to me. But I have used the Microsoft suite of products extensively, and particularly Microsoft Word. So I have great respect for that as a platform. And so I think if you're using Word, you owe it to yourself to, spend a weekend and really dive into that application and learn everything you can learn about how to use it better. Like, I know people that don't know that if you triple click a paragraph, it selects the whole paragraph. Like, I
Right.
mean, how can you use the app and not have come to that understanding of simplicity, or how to double click to select a whole line or select a word. So,
Yeah.
that kind of thing astounds me. Um, and the second, you know, probably most often used application is your uh, practice management software. So whether you're using Clio or Rocket Matter or Practice Panther or My Case or
Yeah.
Smokeball or whatever it is, okay, I'm always astounded by the folks who like have Clio, and you ask them how are you using Clio? They go, I really just use it for billing. Well, you're throwing away 90% of what it was built for.
Yeah.
Use it for everything.
Yeah.
And so those are probably the two biggest applications I use. I'm a big fan right now of Grammarly.
Yeah.
Grammarly has made some real advances in terms of being easy to use. It's really simple to use. You launch it and leave it alone. It's in the background and it runs on damn near everything. And so what
Mhm.
Grammarly does is correct your syntax, your spelling, your grammar, just as you might suspect. And you can train it and tweak it to more accurately reflect your own voice or your writing style. And so I'm a huge fan of Grammarly right now. And then just kind of thinking off the top of my head, another app that I use a lot for social media management is Hootsuite.
Yeah.
So I use Hootsuite. Hootsuite allows me to schedule posts to multiple platforms
Yep.
ahead of time. So I can do my whole social media, um, work in about 5 to 10 minutes a week,
Yeah.
and that allows me to post to Twitter, to Facebook, to LinkedIn, and I post 3 times a week to each of those platforms. Um, I recently did a presentation to the Maryland State Bar Association showing that whole process and how I use another app on my phone called Flipboard.
Mm.
So I use Flipboard as a content curator, and I have a page on Flipboard dedicated to estate planning. So once a week, I turn to that page. It has all the articles that it's gathered from the internet with respect to estate planning. I go down the list. I find ones that I think are interesting. I copy their URL to a ongoing note in Apple Notes, or you can use OneNote if you're using the Microsoft Suite, or Evernote if you use that.
Yeah.
And then when it comes time to do my work in the Hootsuite, I go to that note. I pick the article that I think is relevant for estate planning that I want to share, and I copy the URL. I paste it into Hootsuite. I sign it for posting. I write my own personal description of why I think it's important, why I think people should read it, and I share it that way. And so, poof, I'm done with my social media. Now, it's not nearly um, as well thought out or as tailored and focused as if you were to use, a great service like Spotlight Branding to do your social media management. But if you're just dipping your toe in that and you want to get a sense of it, and then at some point feel like you want to turn it over to the pros to do it in a more comprehensive manner, it's a good
Right.
way to start.
Yeah. And kind of to your point, I mean, I didn't realize like I'm even guilty of doing, the things that you're talking about before. I used to use Flipboard, but I kind of used it as just kind of like a news app. I never thought of using it as kind of like a content curation sort of thing
Oh,
where, I mean, in one of my, past roles here, I was kind of responsible for overseeing some of the content creation that we do and even writing some of the social media for our clients. And that would have been such a huge time saver because a lot of times I would just have like a 5 to 10 different websites bookmarked based on a different practice area. And then I would just kind of go through
yeah.
and hope that like I could find a good article to use for social media. And then Flipboard is just such a genius way to do that.
Yeah, so I'm going to go just look at Flipboard here real quick and tell you what specialized pages I have. Of course, I have one for technology, but one for productivity, one for time management, one for estate planning, one for long-term care insurance, one for estates, one for inheritance, one for trust, one for probate. So you can see there now some articles will appear on multiple pages because they apply to multiple facets of that. So
Right.
I I'll do a month where I've dedicated a month to just discussing issues with respect to probate.
Mhm.
So then I'll go to my probate page in Flipboard, and it's curated all of those for me, and it does that every day.
Yeah.
So every week I go back to it and pick the new ones that I like, and it's really very useful.
Yeah, that's it's absolutely brilliant. So, all right, so we've covered computers, we've covered apps. Let's talk about workflows. Why is that so
Hmm.
important in terms of just automating those sorts of things in a law firm? And what are some ways that you found that really helps that process out?
Well, I think um, workflows, particularly now that we're in a more virtualized environment thanks to the pandemic,
Mhm.
I think that's the first step in systematizing your practice. And if you're a solo or small firm practitioner, the um, the need to create systems to manage the processes within your practice is paramount. If you want to scale and get bigger, i.e., handle more cases, i.e., make more money, or if you have a desire at some point to perhaps sell your practice, uh, you want it systematized to the extent possible. So I think workflows is the first step along that path. And when I first started in as a solo practitioner, and I knew I wanted to base my practice using Apple products, as we had said earlier. In those days, there weren't a lot of choices in terms of practice management software. There was Clio and Rocket Matter were just starting to come into being. Uh, and they had this idea of putting stuff up in something called a cloud,
Mhm.
which nobody really understood at that point. It was kind of scary
Yeah.
uh, for a lot. So I went with a company called Market Circle that makes a product called Daylight,
Mhm.
and I used Daylight as my practice management software, and it ran locally on your computer. Now, years ahead, Daylight's now migrated to the cloud as everybody else has because that's the way to go these days. But one of the strengths, and this long introduction, but one of the strengths of Daylight was they have a feature in their system called pipelines. And you can define a pipeline to create, in essence, a workflow for whatever you're doing within that practice management software. So I had a number of different pipelines developed within Daylight that would control the client intake process. And by control, what it meant was if I created a contact, identified it as a lead, and assigned it to a pipeline, then the pipeline laid out steps along the way that I wanted to take that client, and that would be, it would automatically generate some email messages. So it had kind of a built-in emailer that you could space out over the course of time relative to each other. So send this message 2 days after you enter the pipeline, send this message 3 days after you sent the previous one, so to speak. uh, Create a reminder to call that potential client on the phone to see about setting up a initial conference. So you could systematize the whole client journey from initial contact to what I did at that point was to initial consult scheduled. So that was my first segment. Okay. Then I had another pipeline for and now you can do the same thing in almost any practice management software uh, um, you use now, something similar. Okay? So think of this just in terms of conceptually set up one workflow from initial contact through the scheduling of their initial consultation. Then I have a second workflow from initial consultation to retainer signature.
Yeah.
And, uh, so all of that's completely automated. I tweak that all the time to make sure that the voice is mine.
Yeah.
I've had clients that I've worked with who have who told me I had no idea that you weren't writing to me directly. It just sounded so personalized. And there's ways to use the the client's first name or you know something important. So I would change that too. I mean, I would have kind of topical information in my canned messages. So
Yeah.
when it got to be spring, I would be talking about the pollen in the air, and when it got to be winter, I'd are we going to be seeing snow? And just take 10 minutes to review those and and make them more current,
Right.
more personal. So yeah, so that's kind of where I go with workflows, and then there's all kinds of other workflows that you can implement. Essentially, anytime you're doing more than one task at a time for one client or one legal matter, look to see whether or not you can automate that in some fashion, either within your practice management software or using some other tools. Now, there's a couple of other quick tools that I would mention along those lines. Zapier is just a phenomenal platform.
Yeah.
And what Zapier does is it allows you to connect applications so that using what they call a zap, which is a trigger response mechanism. So when I enter a contact information in Clio, Zapier then takes that contact information and populates a bunch of other applications. So I don't have to rekey that data in. And there are literally thousands upon thousands of two different nations or two different services together. And so that creates an opportunity for workflow construction that is unheard of 5 years ago, 10 years.
Yeah. And, to your point, there's one of the things that I think a lot of people just don't think about is they don't think to ask. I mean, like all of these softwares, the practice management systems, everything like that can pretty much do whatever you can imagine. And if for some reason the app, the practice management software you're using can't do something that you're wondering, that's where Zapier comes in, and you can almost certainly make it work from there. But it's there is, I think, to me, the biggest, I think, trepidation that lawyers have is that there's a pretty big time commitment up front to setting it all up. But I mean, the time that it saves you in the long run completely outweighs the time that you spend setting it all up. So, kind of the last question I have for you here, in your career, even if it's just a rough estimate, I mean, how much time has it saved you setting up all of these automations and using some of these apps? And I mean, estimate maybe just how much money that you've saved or how much even extra revenue that you've been able to create for yourself because you're not spending all the extra time doing all this other stuff.
Well, it's kind of really hard to quantify, but let me do it this way. Okay. Um, I think conservatively, I can say that my commitment to technology and understanding the capabilities of the applications that I use and maximizing their utility to me, I can say conservatively, I can do the work of three people
Yeah.
by myself. Okay. So put a price on that.
Right.
Okay. How much would you pay a law clerk? How much would you pay an associate? How much would you pay, um, a partner? And that's how much I'm saving.
Right. Yeah. No, that's a great way to look at it. So yeah, I mean, I think that's all I've got for you today. We'll just wrap up here with our standard question that we ask everybody. Neil, if you had one piece of advice to give all the attorneys listening out there, what would it be?
Keep plugging away. I know it sounds trivial, but I'm a huge fan of a book by James Clear called Atomic Habits.
Mm,
And James makes the point that really massive change is created by incremental steps along the way. And the ability to stack habits one upon another is fundamental to be able to engineering massive change. And so, uh, as an attorney, I think sometimes we think that we've got to figure out the entire solution before we embark on the journey. And my recommendation is plug away. Just take one little step. Just do one thing. You know, create one zap or uh, learn one new thing about your practice management software or uh, watch one training video. Uh, so many of the platforms that we use have online video training libraries, and I talk to folks, and yeah, I know they're there, but I've never really watched them. I said, well, they're there to help you. They're there to make your
right.
life easier, man. Or just go do one little small thing, one at a time, and put one foot ahead of the other. And we've heard this on many occasions. Um, Good enough is better than great. It doesn't have to be great. It just has to be good enough. Okay. Get it out there, get it working, and then you can refine it. Like I said, my workflows, I go back and refine them all the time to make them more topical, more timely, and more personal. So that's what I would say. And I would also say listen to podcasts such as this one that we're doing today. And if you're so inclined, come join me on The Law Entrepreneur. You can find that anywhere you find podcasts. The hardest thing about that is learning how to spell entrepreneur. But yeah, if you search on Law Entrepreneur, maybe look that word up, you'll find us anywhere and everywhere.
Awesome. Well, Neil, this has been fantastic. Really appreciate you taking some time to come and join us on the show. Like you said, definitely check out Law Entrepreneur. I mean, what you said, like over 270 episodes at this point.
Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, way more resources than we've got so far here on Center Stage. So if we haven't covered a topic that's impactful to you yet, I'm sure it's probably been covered on Law Entrepreneur at this point. So definitely check them out. I think that's going to do it for us this week. We'll see you next time.
Thanks so much.
Thanks for listening. To learn more, go to spotlightbranding.com/center stage.